Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating paradox. If you just read the headlines, you'd probably think California is on the absolute brink of total economic collapse. But the actual data tells a vastly different story of massive, sustained growth. So we're going to break down exactly why California's economy looks so utterly broken to the outside world, but fundamentally just isn't.
Okay, let's dive right into this by addressing the elephant in the room, the overwhelmingly negative sentiment out there. We constantly see sensational quotes claiming that California is entering a slow death spiral, that companies are just fleeing in mass, and that the entire state is essentially one massive, unaffordable disaster waiting to happen.
So the absolutely crucial question we have to ask right off the bat is the Golden State actually doomed? Because when you look at the raw numbers, California's per capita economic output remains higher than almost all global economic outliers. We really need to figure out if these apocalyptic narratives actually match economic reality, or if we're all just getting caught up in the hype. To figure this all out, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll quickly run through the Great California Paradox, the power of agglomeration, housing, taxes, and remote work, the transient workforce problem, trade, visas, and climate threats, and finally wrap up with perception versus economic reality. All right, let's jump straight into part one, the Great California Paradox. So here's the thing. California literally embodies everything advanced economies get spectacularly right, and at the exact same time, everything they get painfully wrong. On one hand, these sensational narratives are hyper-focused on crushing poverty, a mass exodus, and totally unaffordable living conditions. And look, it's incredibly easy to feel a little bit of schadenfreude seeing smug tech bros and activewear enthusiasts struggle a bit, right? But the impartial data reveals an economic reality that is incredibly robust. California has grown comfortably for decades without any major interruption. Actually, it grows faster than the US average, which itself grows faster than pretty much any other major economy in the world, with the single exception of China.
Let's move on to section 2, the power of agglomeration, or what we can think of as the economic engine.
The foundation of that engine proves California is absolutely not a one-trick pony. The state's incredible resilience comes from a super diverse array of highly technical and massively valuable sectors. You've got technology and entertainment, obviously, but also massive financial services, critical shipping hubs connecting to the rest of the US, world-class universities like Stanford and Caltech, and some of the most complex, diverse agriculture in the entire country. This essentially means that if one industry hits a rough patch, the others can easily step in and carry the weight. Which brings us to a really vital concept called agglomeration. It's an economic principle where industries simply operate better when all related aspects are clustered tightly together. The crucial point here is this powerful feedback loop. Smart people and risk-seeking investors move to California because that's where the cutting-edge companies are. And in turn, those companies get started in California because that's exactly where the smart people and the venture capitalists are. The exact same logic applies to Hollywood. Studios, actors, and producers all cluster together because you simply cannot easily replicate that dense ecosystem anywhere else.
But here is where the story shifts. That brings us to section 3, housing, taxes, and remote work, the signs of reversing.
That same powerful feedback loop we just talked about, well, it's beginning to show real signs of reversing, creating massive internal pressures that are quite literally pushing people out of the state. On paper, housing affordability is usually measured by comparing average home prices against average incomes. And because a handful of venture capitalists and tech founders make so much money, the average income in places like the Bay Area looks incredibly high, theoretically offsetting those sky-high property values. But the housing reality on the ground tells a completely different story. That extreme wealth heavily skews the averages and completely masks the truth that everyday workers, the essential people in all those supporting industries, are completely priced out. The budget-friendly options have simply vanished. Compounding this massive housing crisis is a highly unique tax vulnerability. Compared to places like Texas or Florida, California utilizes a modest property tax rate and lacks the kind of broad sales taxes that heavily hit consumption. Instead, California's tax structure is uniquely reliant on the highest state income taxes and capital gains taxes from top earners. This means the state is heavily tied to the boom and bust cycle of the wealthy. When times are good and stocks are selling, revenues soar. But with the new remote work era allowing high earners to just pack up and leave for cheaper states, state revenues become dangerously sensitive to economic fluctuations. This demographic challenge perfectly sets up Section 4, the transient workforce problem, the get in and get out mindset. Just think about the life cycle of a modern California worker for a second. Step 1, move to California to land a highly paid tech or entertainment job. Step 2, Save up some money, get that highly valued experience, and polish the resume. Step 3, relocate to a cheaper state where your money goes way farther and taxes are lower. Because so much of the talent is imported from out of state with this specific get in and get out mindset, a huge portion of the state's tax base completely lacks a vested long-term interest in funding local community programs. I mean, why vote for long-term infrastructure in a place you only plan to live in for a few years?
Let's look outside the state now in Section 5, Trade, Visas, and Climate Threats. Beyond its internal policies and housing frictions, California faces massive external vulnerabilities that could potentially break its economic critical mass. And these external threats are huge precisely because they are largely out of the state's control. First, California relies heavily on skilled global migration. With increasing scrutiny on H-1B visas, that crucial pipeline of foreign talent is genuinely threatened. Second, trade wars disproportionately hit California. As a massive logistics hub and one of the highest exporters of goods, not to mention the largest exporter of services, like Hollywood movies, which have faced severe pushback in massive markets like China, geopolitical tensions hurt local revenues incredibly fast. Finally, we have climate threats. Extreme wildfires are quite literally making homes uninsurable for traditional mortgage lenders, threatening the very foundation of the state's massive real estate market.
Which brings us to our final segment, Section 6, Perception versus Economic Reality, the magnifying glass. There's a really fascinating contrast in how poverty is actually viewed. In some states, invisible poverty is largely ignored, and those states actually get praised despite having higher overall poverty rates. But in California, you have broadcasted poverty. California actually has a lower poverty rate than many of those praised states. But because practically every influencer is out there with a selfie stick broadcasting from global hubs like Los Angeles, local issues become hyper-visible to the entire world. A problem in LA gets exponentially more global airtime than the exact same problem in a lesser-known town.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we are left with a massive, lingering question. Are we genuinely watching a global economic engine break, or are we just watching it closer than any other place on Earth? Given the incredible, diverse resilience of its foundational industries, it seems the Golden State isn't quite in a death spiral just yet, but it's undoubtedly operating under a magnifying glass, unlike anywhere else. What do you think? Is the California model fundamentally broken, or is it just the most scrutinized economy in the world?